the third stage of the Mimer. We are holding on Eis Gimel, and we were speaking about Avodim Hayinu Lefari B'Mitzrayim, that the meaning of Avodim Hayinu Lefaroi, Avodim Hayinu, how could it be that a Yid should be an Eved? How could it be that a Yid should be a servant? That's because it's Leparoi. Paroi is Oisius Ha'oref. Oisius Ha'oref means that because there's the level of the neck indicates Chitzonius Haratzon, the external will. Because there's the level of the neck, which is the external will, that's how it's possible for a person to be an Eved. Because when there is the internal will is that the Eibishter wants to connect with Yid. The external will is that there could be Yidden, there could be Goyim. Hashem wants the world, he wants Goyim, he wants Yidden, he wants this, he wants that. And when the external will shines, so then the Maila of the Yidden is not evident. It's only when the internal will shines, which the internal will is that in the Yidden and Torah, that's when it's impossible for Yidden to be servants. So that's why Avodim Hayinu is Lepari. The reason that we are servants is because it was Pari, there was Oisius Ha'oref. How does Pari Oisius Ha'oref come about? But the answer to that is because B'Mitzrayim, when you have the Medidas V'Hagbolas, you have the limitations of Medidas V'Hagbolas cause divisions, separations, even in Olam Yisrael Yonim. So those separations that it causes in Olam Yisrael Yonim allow for a separation between Oiref and Ponim, the Chitzonius Haratzon and the Pnimius Haratzon. So one part of the pasuk follows the other. Avodim Hayinu Leparoi. Why? B'Mitzrayim, because there was the Mitzarim, there were the constraints, there were the boundaries that caused this type of division and separation. But when there will be a revelation of Hashem's essence from the highest, most levels, from Pnimius, Atik, and so on, over there's no divisions between the Panim and the Oiref. Everything is Panim, like everything is Yamin, and therefore there's no Tzimtzum and constriction, and then it's impossible for Yidden to be any more the level of Avod. So now, on page 5 of the Maimer and Ois Gimel, he's going to say, so what do we do to overcome this? How do we manage to overcome the situation? To be able to overcome the idea of servitude and slavery that comes as a result of only the revelation of the external will, the level of a oidef, paraya, oisius, oidef, the neck, the back. So to do that, to repair that problem, to deal with that issue, it needs to be brought down from a much higher level. To heal that rift, to heal that separation, we need to, like the Rebbe always brings down, when we need to join like two opposites, we need to bring the Pnimius Haratzon back into the Chitzonius Haratzon. You need to have a revelation of the King, of the Kings of Kings, Hashem, in his glory and in his essence. Now, the fact that it says, so a lot of times Chassidus emphasize when it says his covet, his essence, just like that's an indication of the level of covet and his in the most highest level of his. The level of his glory and his essence that's before the Tzimtzum. Like to explain the Mamorim of the Rebbe Rashab. Covet is often associated with the level of Malchus. Like it says, Baruch Shem Kivoid Malchus. So we have the level of covet, the level of glory and honor has to do with the sphere of Malchus. But that is when it's just covet alone. But when it's kvoid doi, is covet, that's talking about the level of Malchus away from the highest, most level. The level of the Malchus of the Ein Sof. That's kvoidoi. And also Ba'atzmai is even higher. Atzmusim is Baruch, the level of the Abish's essence, the way it's higher in the Eirin Sof Shlifnei Atzimtzum. That's what the Rebbe brings from the Rebbe Rashab, Adla Gili, Atzmusim Hus, that the terms that Nigla Leim Melech Malch Amlach Makash Baruch Geolam B'Chvoidoi Uba Atzmai, the Chvoidoi Ba'atzmai comes to indicate the most highest levels. But even though it's the most highest levels, it needs to merge and needs to become embedded in our levels down here. So there's this elevated level to be drawn down and become revealed down here below. Tzadikly is in an islapshus spheres. There has to be the idea of coming enclosed in the spheres. Like it's explained in the Mimer. The Pirish Masha Kosovo and the explanation of what it says. In continuation, what it says of Avodim Hayinu Lefarim and Mitzrayim. What do we say further in that part? We say Hashem took us out over there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. It's referring to the level of Ze'er Ampin, the Midas, or in general, it's referring to the 10 spheres. Havai Lekenu, Chachma Bina, Yad Chazak of Zrenetuya, has to do with Zoh and Malchus. So it's referring to the expression and revealing of the spheres, which is Shoirish Bnei Yisrael Lamata. The 10 spheres above are the Shoirish for the Yidden down here below, like we say right away in the beginning of Tanya about the Eser Koikas on Nefesh. He says, Shnishtal Shalom Ahen, they came from the 10 spheres above. Shahoisa Begals Mitzrayim B'chinas Ibur, that both the level of Ze'er Ampin, especially the Midas, the Midas are likened to a child, and Golus is like the child in a state of still being a fetus within the mother, state of Ibur, a state of pregnancy. And when Zah is in a state of pregnancy within the intellect, within the Seichel, Bina is called the mother of the Midas, Ema Bonim Smecha. It includes the Midas concealed in it. When the Midas, which is the Shoirish of Neshamas Yisrael, is in a state of Ibur, so then it's possible to be Avodim Hayinu Lefarim Mitzrayim. Then it's possible for the Goyim to have control over us. And then by Yetzienu Misham, Hashem took us out, brought both the Midas above, which is the source of Neshamas Yisrael, Zer Ampin, which is the source of Neshamas Yisrael. He brought it forth in a way of birth. And then, down here below, we were born as a nation as well. In the spiritual sense, is the idea of the birth of the Midas. And when the Midas were born, Lamaila, so then, corresponding to that down here, there was also Leidas Am Yisrael with the Geula, as he's about to explain. Yes, this idea that there was the birth of the Midas, the birth of Zah above, which is the Shoirish and Shams Yisrael, that led to the Golus being eradicated, is the same thing, is the idea of Yitzias Mitzrayim in the simple sense. Like it says about Yitzias Mitzrayim, that Hashem took a nation for himself from within a nation. In other words, the Yidden were inside Mitzrayim, almost like mixed into Mitzrayim, and he extracted them and made them his nation. And the Chazal explained that this is a good metaphor for taking one nation out from another nation, that it's similar to the idea of birth. And we actually bring psukim in the Haggadah from Yechezkel Hanavi that refers to the time of us going out of Mitzrayim as a birth. The birth of the Jewish people was with our leaving Mitzrayim, because the whole idea of the transition of Golus to Geula is an idea of birth. And even as we know, the transition of Golus to Geula, when Mashiach comes, is called Hevle Leda, labor pains, because Golus is considered that the Yidden are in a state of being Ibur, they're concealed within the other nation, and then Geula, they're extracted and they're born, and in that transition, it's a painful transition sometimes. But the Rebbe said we were already Yoitz all the Hevle Leda, Mashiach can come already. So he says that in Sefer Yecheskel, we have different psukim that we actually bring down in the Haggadah that are likening the Yidden going out of Mitzrayim to a birth, because then when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim was the birth of Am Yisrael. Just like after birth. Once you have birth, that's not the end. Okay, the child was born, that's it. No. Once the child was born, same thing, once the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, there's a further process. Now the child has to grow. Child is small, now he grows. So too, after Yetzias Mitzrayim, Yidden grew. There was the growth and maturity that the Yidden attained by Matan Torah. So the birth was Yetzias Mitzrayim, the maturity was by Matan Torah. Because of, like we see that it's all one continuation by Tziyachas Am Mitzrayim Tabn Tzalakim Al Horazeh that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush that when you take this nation out of Mitzrayim, you will serve Hashem on this mountain, which means that it's all one continuum and it completes the process. Haynu Shashleim is the Yetzias Mitzrayim Matan Torah. The perfection of going out of Mitzrayim is the giving of the Torah. So, okay. Yetzias Mitzrayim, we were children. The completion, the maturity is Matan Torah. How do we get from A to B? And this growth from a state of minorities, from a state of being young and small, legadlus, to being great. That's through the avodah of Sfiras HaOmer that links and connects the going out of Mitzrayim with the receiving of the Torah, and that makes and helps us grow from a state of being a cotton to a god. Top of page 6. Any questions before we go on? Top of page 6 is Dalet. Now we'll continue in the classic idea that the Rebbe always emphasizes. Truth is, the Rebbe always emphasizes in every thing that we learn in the Torah. It's not just something that happened then, X amount of years ago. It is happening and it is repeating now. But it's even more powerful so when the Rebbe speaks about Yetzias Mitzrayim, because of this obligation of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim daily, and therefore it's an idea of reliving it and experiencing it. So even though in every mitzvah, in every celebration, everything that Rebbe brings it out, how it's applicable, not just to that Yom Tov or whatever, but it's applicable in day-to-day life. But in Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's the ultimate. It's like really every single day, Yetzias Mitzrayim, that's Krishma, that's why we have to remember it, and so on. Chazal said, B'chol dor v'dor, in every single generation, and Alter Rebbe adds in Tanya, B'chol yom v'yom, in every single day, a person needs to envision himself as if today he went out of Mitzrayim. Now, this is not just a picture. This is not just a nice fantasy. This means that there's a practical demand made on us with this remembrance. Haynu in the Yetzias Mitzrayim. The general idea of going out of Mitzrayim, the way it was in the first time around, meaning the general spiritual type of leaving and birth and so on and growth, also repeats itself annually every single year. The details, obviously the details are not there. Obviously we're not physically in Egypt, and physically we're not going to the desert, and physically we're not getting the Torah. But the general concept of what's about and what it represents repeats itself annually. Now, the Rebbe is going to make the distinction between annually versus what he just now said, that it's a daily type of thing. So the Rebbe brings over here something that the Rebbe also says in the Haggadah, that what the Rebbe in the Haggadah asked the question, what's the difference between the chiyuv of remembering Yitzias Mitzrayim, that we have the obligation, the mitzvah of Pesach, versus the mitzvah that the Chacham bring down, that person needs to remember every single day. What's the difference between the two, between what we do on Pesach by the Seder versus every day? So he says, what we're doing every single year, the Rebbe says in the brackets, B'leila Pesach, during the night of Pesach, that when it comes to the night of Pesach, then the remembering is through fulfilling mitzvahs in action. It's not just in speech, whereas daily the mitzvah of remembering Yitzias Mitzrayim is mitzvah lahaskir Yitzias Mitzrayim b'chol yoyim. The mitzvah is to remember going out of Mitzrayim daily. So that difference is only, I'm sorry, that idea of, that is one idea of the difference between Pesach Seder versus the daily mitzvah. The daily mitzvah, we only have to say it b'dibur. We only have to remember it. Part of Sheish Chidas, or the reason, like we've mentioned in the previous Maimorim, why we say parts of Vayomer, because it reminds us of Yitzias Mitzrayim, not just once a day, but twice a day, even by night, like Reb Lozer ben Azariah and Ben Zoyme Darshan. But as opposed to Pesach night, it's not just in speech. The way we commemorate and remember Yitzias Mitzrayim is elagam b'ma'aseh b'poel, also in actual action. We have to do activities that remind us of going out of Mitzrayim. At a time when there's matzah mortar placed and lying before you, meaning that the remembrance and commemoration is connected with action. And the action obviously makes the commemoration of a much stronger type of way, like the Rishonim explained, that Adam nimshach achrei pu'ulosav, that they say specifically about Yitzias about the mitzvahs of Pesach, that the reason why there's all these mitzvahs on Pesach is because it should make this greater impact, because a person is drawn after his action. You're just going to meditate and remember Yitzias Mitzrayim in your mind. Or even if you say it with words, it doesn't have the same impact and same memory and the same ongoing type of effect as when we actually sit down and do activities, eating the matzah, eating the maror, drinking the wine, etc., etc. These are things that make the memory more concrete and more identified with us. That's one of the reasons that the Rebbe says over there in the Haggadah, or one of the explanations of the difference of the mitzvah to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim on the night of Pesach versus every single day. Just to mention two other reasons offhand what the Rebbe says over there, that on Yitzias Pesach night, there's a mitzvah to say it in a way of response to a child's question. That's what it says, you should tell your son at that day. Which day? The day of Yitzias Mitzrayim. The day when you're doing the Pesach, you have to do it in a way of telling it over to your son that has to be communicated to the children, has to be in a way of give and take. Whereas all year round, it's just you say it to yourself, the Sheish Chidas, you say to yourself parts of Vayomer, and then you were fulfilling the mitzvah of the Chidas Yitzias Mitzrayim b'chol yom. Another difference that Rebbe says in the Haggadah between Yitzias Mitzrayim daily and the Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim that we have paced by the Seder is that by the daily mitzvah, it's important. It's just necessary to mention it. You make one mention of it, like in Parshas Vayomer. How much do you say already over there? That's it. With that, you're already Yotze. Or, like we say it in the Sheish Chidas, that's sufficient, that's enough. You were Yotze the mitzvah. Pesach Seder, the mitzvah is to speak about it and explain it to such a degree that Kol HaMarba L'Saper B'Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Haggadah says, one who increases and adds in relating and telling over about Yitzias Mitzrayim, Areis Meshubach, is praiseworthy, because the mitzvah on the Seder night is to say with a lot of information. Anyway, I digress from the point that he's saying over here. That first he begins with the idea of remembrance of Yitzias Mitzrayim annually, but that's not enough. There is also, after the brackets on page 6, there is really this idea of remembering also daily. This is also a lesson in the Torah, Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life. היינו, it's a lesson that's applicable to every single Yid in his lifetime. But Torah's emes, that's a Torah of truth. This is the way it truly is. Every single day, there's the idea of going out of Mitzrayim in the person's service to Hashem. Meaning, when we're talking about that there's a Torah and a mitzvah of the Torah, to remember Yitzias Mitzrayim, that means it's something that I'm acting out, something that I'm living. So, what was that? So we started. Every single day, we have to start again with the idea of birth. And afterwards, the growth from being a minor to an adult. This idea of going out of Mitzrayim with all these different details, it's the avoid of being face to face with Hashem. What that means is in other Mamorich Chassidus, he says, what counters that level that Chitzonius Haratzon is in ascendancy, meaning that it seems to be that there's no difference between a Yid and a Goy. That's when we make sure that we serve Hashem with our Pnimius Haratzon, Panim Bepanim, instead of with our Chitzonius Haratzon. The Rebbe many times brings a pasuk, Kipanu Elai Oidev, that even when they turn to me with their neck, meaning the Chitzonius Haratzon. What do we say Chitzonius Haratzon is? Chitzonius Haratzon is, this is not your ultimate, this is not what you're interested in, you're just doing it for a different reason. So when a person's will and his desires are really in Gashmistic things, but he does, let's say, what Hashem wants him to do, because he knows Hashem runs the world, or because he's interested in everything going good for him, and he knows Hashem will protect him if he does Torah mitzvahs, or whatever other ulterior motives, that means that his connection to Hashem is with his Chitzonius Haratzon. So when his connection with Hashem is with the Chitzonius Haratzon, that leaves a possibility for Hashem's revelation in this world to be only the Chitzonius Haratzon. And when there's the Oidev, the Chitzonius Haratzon, then there could be a possibility of Avdim Hayinu. If we serve Hashem in a way of our inner will, of our faith, meaning that our desire is Hashem, our desire is Torah mitzvah. They're not done for an ulterior motive because I want to get from Hashem benefits, I want to get from Hashem Gan Eden, I want to be successful in this world. I do it because I love Hashem and I love Torah mitzvahs. That's panim bepanim. So when our connection is Hashem with our face, with our pnimius, so then Hashem's face shines to us, the pnimius haratzon shines to us as well, and takes us out of any constrictions. Through that we nullify the level of the neck, which is the back, like we said, which is the letters of the word pari oisis ha'oida. This idea of the avoid of panim bepanim is the avoid of total devotion, complete self-sacrifice for Hashem, because there's nothing else that interests me except for Hashem. Which is also the avoid with all your might. That there's no, that the avoid shalom mailam did of agbol, it's an avoid beyond measure and boundary. If I'm doing Torah mitzvahs because of Chitzonius Haratzon, so then there's limitations. This is how far I'm doing it. I don't go further than this. But if I'm doing a mitzvah not because of chitzonius aratzon. If I'm doing it because of my unbelievable passion for Hashem, so then there's no boundaries, there's no limitations. Like we see a person that does something because they love someone. Because they love someone, there's no logic, there's no reason, there's no stopping them. What are you doing this for? He's going crazy about it. Why? Because he's doing it because of the complete devotion. Through this, we nullify the measure and the boundary and the constraints and the boundaries of Mitzrayim, which Mitzrayim, we said, is the idea of constraints, and therefore it makes the separation between the inner will and the outer will, and therefore it's possible for the outer will only to be revealed, and when the outer will is only revealed, then it's possible for us to be avoid. First is there has to be the b'chol moedech. First there has to be the jumping and leaving Mitzrayim, the birth, upon him. Once we have attained and broken out of that barrier, the Mitzarim v'gvulim, so just like in the physical Mitzrayim, once we were born, now we have to grow. The same thing. Once we had the Mesiras Nefesh, once we had the level of without measure and boundary, now we have to go in a step-by-step growth process, like the Sfiras Omer is the maturing and growing from a state of being a child to an adult. In this, there's the order of growth from being a minor to being an adult. Until through this we're coming speedily to the revelation of the inner level of Atik that will be in the future when Mashiach comes. And all this has to be in the ultimate alacrity, in the ultimate speed. And the boy, big Geras HaKodesh, like it's explained in the Geras HaKodesh in Tanya, the idea of the speed of Avraham Avinu, that's what stood us by in good stead. The Alter Rebbe in the Geras HaKodesh asks over there, why do we make such a big deal and we remember it in davening every single day, and on Rosh Hashanah we make special mention of it, and we say the schus of Avraham Avinu's sacrificing and being willing to sacrifice Yitzchak and the Akedah stands us in good stead for all time. How come? What's so special, seemingly? Many Jews throughout the generations weren't only ready to sacrifice their lives and even sacrifice the lives of their family, but they actually did so. So what's so special about Avraham Avinu? So one of the answers that's given, and this is the answer that Alter Rebbe says in Tanya in the Geras HaKodesh, is that it says, Vayashkem Avraham baboker, that Avraham got up early in the morning, that Avraham's love for Hashem was so powerful that even though it meant offering up his only son that he waited till his old age to be able to get from Hashem as a gift, and now he was running and rushing and getting up the first thing in the morning to be able to do this mitzvah of Hashem. In other words, Zrizus Shel Avram, the alacrity, the speed of Avram in doing a mitzvah, that was the ultimate expression of his love. So therefore, the Rebbe says the same thing by us. Our avoiding going out of Mitzrayim has to be in such a way of Zrizus. By days and through this level of Zrizus, so through this, the avoider of Mashiach's times will also be or the redemption will also be in a way of speed and rushing. Similar to the rushing that it was when we went out of Mitzrayim, that it says there's a medrash that brings down that that the chipazon, or actually there's like three different explanations that the Chazal bring down about the chipazon that took place in Mitzrayim, and we'll speak about that tomorrow.